Hello, everybody. We're back. Sandy, how are you today? Before we
I
get
am
in,
great.
great. It's great that you're great because the topic that we're talking about is so it's coming from last episode that we recorded, and I was trying to figure out how the let me make it get it right. How like the outdated software or the software itself, how does it fit into vehicle of consciousness and the whole equation? Can you maybe, before we go into the software, explain where does it fit in, and then we can go from there.
Yes. Just so our listeners know, I don't really want to know necessarily what topics we're doing ahead of time. So Astra comes up with the topics based on what she thinks would be a logical process for people to, or a logical journey for people to go through. So this is going to be really good. This is going to be a lot of fun. And it's a good thing I had lots of water and fruit and I'm on my game this morning because that's a pretty meaty topic. Let's get into it. So where does it fit in? Your question is. So as we talked in the vehicle of consciousness metaphor I use, your brain is the supercomputer and your brain has lots of software. It's often, so think of it as like a computer that then gets a lot of software programs that are running. And it's often said in self-help that 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness, the thoughts we think, the choices we make, the beliefs we perceive, and the choices, whatever, all of those things are subconscious. And anything in the subconscious is like software that's running kind of below the level of our awareness.
Okay.
And so not only can that mean that we have sort of perceptual filters that are unhelpful, say, now that's a separate probably episode that we'll do, but the thoughts we think over and over become beliefs because the subconscious learns through repetition. Our beliefs become perceptual filters of how we view the world. It also means that our subconscious, a lot of what is programmed there, a lot of the software is what we received before the age of 7 when our brain was in a theta state, primarily in a theta state, which means it's like an open computer that's just sucking in software. So it means that we're not necessarily, our authentic self is not necessarily aligned with some of the programming.
Mm.
And the other thing it means is that we kind of go through life, and since 90 to 95% of us is below the level of our awareness in this subconscious, which is just like a computer running software, that we're not actually fully experiencing the magic of free will. And it can mean that we're repeating old patterns that we do not prefer because the left brain prioritizes familiarity, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. So, like I always say, if you're not training your brain is training you. And becoming aware is always the first step. Because again, if something is in the subconscious, which is approximately 90 to 95% of most people, it's never about looking at what's there and going, ew. It's about celebrating our ever-expanding awareness. Because we also develop blind spots, which would, again, be a whole other episode in itself. But we develop blind spots that we don't want to look at because that software or that programming doesn't fit our self-concept. So there's lots of different layers to this software. But when the exciting thing is we don't necessarily have to know when it all started, where it came from, what it is. What is most helpful is to learn how to reprogram it. And so then you, as the pilot of that vehicle of consciousness, you know how to reprogram that supercomputer so that your new habits, your new choices, your new behaviors, your new beliefs, your new thoughts, your new perceptual filters can run as automatically and effortlessly as possible because they will go back into the subconscious. The same as, for instance, when you first start driving a car and you're like, okay, I have to put my hands at 10 and 2. Now I have to I have to put the signal on, but I have to do a shoulder check, and you repeat it over and over and over. And eventually it's subconscious software. It runs automatically. You don't have to put your awareness on it. Or carrying a cell phone. Well, people my age at least, didn't always carry a cell phone. but we got in the habit of carrying a cell phone. Now you don't even think about it. You're not like, oh my goodness, I have to find my cell phone. So we can create really exciting, empowering, inspiring, authentically aligned micro habits that we can program into our subconscious that allow our lives to run in a way that is really fulfilling for us, rather than just sort of having our vehicle of consciousness piloting us with a bunch of outdated software that not even have anything to do with how we feel, what we think, what we want, or what fulfills us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you mentioned reprogramming. Before that, how do we even identify what to reprogram? Like, what's the process there? How do we bring it back from, you said that it's kind of out of our awareness. How do we bring it to our awareness?
Well, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of different answers. So one method would be to just decide what programs you do want running and just install them. So those would be more like your habits, like sleeping habits, thinking habits, eating habits. But if we want to really integrate some of those more emotional or personality components, we can do self-awareness work. We can do what's often referred to as shadow work, or as you know, I call eating our shit sandwiches, or celebrating the awareness of our blind spots. We call it in corporate coaching metaphors. And also, a lot of people kind of know what's not working in their life. People kind of know their emotional navigation system is telling them that something is not working, or sometimes people are aware of what they're doing, but they're not aware of why they're doing it, or they don't know how to stop it. So it could be, I have a habit of self-sabotaging, as we call it, which I don't love that term, which we'll get into another time. But we have a pattern or behavior that we identify is not serving our highest good. Another way is really to do our authentic alignment work and our self-awareness work, and just trusting and also feeling our feelings and finding sort of our triggers. So our triggers can also be information about what's happening in the subconscious. And again, we'll do a whole separate episode on triggers, and
Probably
I
more than
will
one.
share I will share my trigger protocol that I've come up with over the years to help us, because triggers are portals and gateways to our evolution and expansion, or understanding what's in the subconscious. But again, I would like to invite people to consider that we don't have to know all the things and where they came from and how they happened. I love that activity because it's something I really enjoy. It's like my special interest. But if you're not interested in going that deep, you can just learn how to reprogram it without knowing where it came from, why it's there. You can just start to choose what programs you would like to run automatically, like speaking kindly to others, speaking kindly to yourself, creating a program of self-confidence, creating a program of compassion, creating a program of nourishing food habits that fill up the gas tank in our avatar, and things like that. And a program of forgiveness to others, and a program of curiosity, and a program of all of these things that that are just helpful to have running automatically in the background. Because like I said, once you know how to program that supercomputer, master the mind and train the brain, you can program whatever you want in there. And through repetition, over time, that's going to be an automatic software that runs as effortlessly as our inner critic does, or our eating pizza at 10 o'clock at night does, or staying up too late, or drinking too much caffeine, or whatever it is, or thinking thoughts of lack and poverty, or judgment, or shame, or guilt, or whatever these patterns and habits are. They're just habits and programs. They're not who you are. They're not meant to be limited, or you're not meant to be constrained to be within those limits. They're just outdated software. And I like looking at that, because then it doesn't feed this shame and guilt of like, I am a bad person, this is who I am. No, it's not. It's just nonsense software. It's just software that doesn't help. And we can discover where it came from and how it got there, but sometimes it's not even that helpful to revisit it, because when we're revisiting and revisiting, we're actually reinforcing that software, reinforcing that neural pattern and the emotional signal that the brain has programmed with whatever that experience is. So we don't even necessarily have to always revisit or revisit or revisit. We just look at what's not working, what do we want, how do we program it as quickly as possible, and how's that, and ensuring that it's something that's going to serve our highest good. And again, I invite you to consider, it's eventually you make a conscious choice to do it differently over and over and over, as many times and as many failures as it takes, and you celebrate every single failure as evidence of success and bravery until that becomes your new subconscious baseline or software. And often that looks like this, goes up and down, and we go, from a 2 to a 7, and then we go back down to a 2. Then we go back up to 7, but then we fall back down to 3, but we don't stay there as long. So it's just being compassionate of whatever that reprogramming looks like, because the subconscious learns through repetition. Think of a time when you've listened to a song on the radio. Even if you can't stand the song, if you hear it 4 or 5 times, you start to be able to sing it. It gets in your subconscious, and then you're not even asking for it to come up, and it's like la 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 la, and it sings in your head. So repetition is our greatest gift when reprogramming or creating subconscious software that serves our authentic alignment and most magnetic lives.
A few things I wanted to mention when you said about whys. I think even if we go into whys, it's really important to get some guidance, because even like myself, when I was growing up, I would try to understand myself. I would even get to understanding, oh, I'm like this because of this. But then I would kind of use that story as a reason not to do anything or not to change anything, which can kind of get me stuck, where it's like, I can't do it because this is a reason. Here's a story,
Yeah.
And I think this
Because
is,
my parents didn't love me enough,
yeah.
or because I was bullied in school, or because.
Yeah, and I think this is where it's really important to have some kind of guidance or somebody that can help with those whys. Because I
Yeah.
know I would just walk in circles and I would know all the whys, but I wouldn't change anything. And I wanted to ask you a question about those programs that we want. How do we identify even programs that we might think we want? How can we know that those are the ones that we actually want versus maybe some that we would think that, oh, I have to want this,
Ooh, that's a good question. Woo, your questions are the best. So let's do those one at a time. So just to refresh for the audience, let me reflect back to your first question, and please correct me if that's not what you're wondering. So you're saying that it can be very helpful to have guidance if we want to go back and visit the why, so that we don't create this sort of story and reinforce this sort of belief system that prevents us, or that prevents us from going outside of that story because we get attached to it or addicted to it, or knowing the why doesn't necessarily help us get out of it.
Yeah,
Is that sort of?
that's me speaking from experience, and I have talked
Yeah.
a few people who even they are so attached to that story that
Yeah.
a lot of times it's hard to go out, partly even at least by yourself, because you don't know what you don't know. So
Yes.
that's where you might even talk a bit more from your experience. Have you even had some experiences like that yourself, or what are some of the things that might help to get out? And do you see that it's beneficial or more beneficial, less beneficial, whichever, to get somebody that can help to get that guidance?
Yes. So I'm a big fan of getting support, obviously, and that's the industry I'm in. Let's be real. But it can be something you navigate on your own, or it can be accelerated if you have the right help from the right person that you align with. And that's different people for different people. But yes, having somebody who can lovingly respect and respectfully reflect things to you that might be below the level of your awareness can accelerate your growth. And somebody who can sit with you and hold space and acknowledge and validate your story without, again, like you said, having it become part of your identity. Because there's a lot of things, I've had a lot of traumas or experiences in my life that could be part of my story, and I could be living from a very dramatic victim sort of story. And as people often refer to as the ego, which again would be another episode in itself, the ego kind of wants to keep us in stories and wants to keep us in victimhood, or the conditioned self, let's call it, is more what we call it in my model for our coaching. That conditioned self wants to keep the story. It wants to justify its feelings. It's fascinated by that, by the feelings that we get. We can get addicted to the feelings that we, even if they're not pleasant feelings, like poor me. So it's important to go down and acknowledge those things, acknowledge the inner child, acknowledge the wound, but not get stuck there. We acknowledge it, we feel it, we heal it, and then we choose where we want to go. Because getting stuck in the story is very normal. So don't be ashamed if you're stuck in a story. It's just that we're so much more. We are, as it's often said, divine spiritual beings, or fragments of source consciousness experiencing a human reality. And we are so much greater than the story of our suffering. Our story of our suffering might be part of our story, but it sort of, to me, comes down to, did I want to write, direct, and star in a mind movie? Because we have 8 billion parallel realities happening, 8 billion minds creating their own mind movie through their perceptual filters and the way we experience the world. Do I want to star in a hero's journey, or do I want to play the victim in my story? And for me, it's just more fun to be expansive and to be excited and to be empowered and to learn from my mistakes and learn from my past story rather than making it my identity. But that requires a precondition of self-acceptance, forgiveness, and what I call radical compassion. And understanding and having compassion that it's very normal to get addicted to our stories and very normal to get addicted to emotions. And basically what's happening is the emotions are like supercharging those neural pathways, like a lawnmower just going like in a field. And the more we reinforce those neural pathways, the stronger they get. So just making, again, a conscious choice to do, think, and be different over and over and over and over as many times as it takes. Sometimes it's even like fake it till you become it. Because you are trying to reprogram sometimes decades of well-installed software and deeply ingrained neural pathways. And getting stuck in that emotion, thought, feedback loop is very normal, but it's just not as much fun as becoming the programmer of that reality and saying, yeah, I am starring in a movie, but I get to choose what character I want to play in my movie. And to me, it's just a lot more fun to write a different story.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's really empowering as well. Even that sense of you are creating you, or you are building you, that you have that power to do that or to improve yourself. That, because I remember there was one time when I was just sitting and I was like, compared to who I was, I have grown so much. And I was like, that's me who did that, who put in the work and who built that person. And I think a lot of times we can even get stuck in that continuous improvement where we don't even stop to acknowledge the work that we have done and how much we have grown.
That's a really good point. I think we should pause there for a moment. I would really invite people to pause, even schedule it in your phone, something to focus on our progress, because I often get stuck in the I'd less so now, but I used to get stuck focusing on the absence of perfection rather than celebrating that ever expanding awareness. And even if we're falling into those old patterns, or that old software is taking over those neural pathways, or the path of least resistance, so we go back to them every now and then, especially if we're tired or if we're stressed, I think it can be helpful to pause and say, wait a minute, I'm back in this pattern. That means I was out of it. That means I'm capable of being out of it. And wait, I went 2 days without falling into it. I'm amazing. And I really think if we continuously, every single day, celebrate ourselves, even celebrate our failures, whoa, I'm aware that I failed today. I was being a bully. I was being a jerk. I was eating crappy food and I gave some guy the finger in traffic. Look at how aware I am, and celebrate our awareness and celebrating our progress every day and cheering ourselves on can really be energizing and help also reprogram that subconscious and reprogram that inner critic. So scheduling time and just celebrating ourselves and equally celebrating our failures as evidence of effort and bravery can be really important, because you're right, we can get blinders on and we can forget how far we've come. You're somebody who's had a great journey of running half marathons. So if you were just only focused on being at the finish line of that half marathon and you were constantly like, I'm not at the end yet, I'm not at the end yet, I'm not at the end yet, I should be at the end yet, it wouldn't be as fun to run the marathon as if you were like, I don't know, I'm amazing, look at me go. Oh, I ran 2 miles, I'm incredible, this is amazing, look at how far I've come from that starting line. You're still going to get to the end either way, but with that sort of encouraging and celebration way, it's going to feel a lot more fun, and you're going to be reprogramming your subconscious mind to celebrate yourself rather than beat yourself up, because most of us have a program of the inner critic, we often call it. So yeah, I really think pausing to focus on our progress and carving time out to celebrate ourselves and focus that, like, maybe I went back into recently, actually, when I got married, I went back into an old pattern that I have not visited for, I mean, probably more than a decade. And my instant reaction was to be like, I shouldn't have done this. I teach this stuff. I'm a failure. I can't believe I fell into this pattern. Instead of going, whoa, I used to live in this pattern. And I did not live in this pattern for 10 years. And I revisited it long enough to see if there was a little more work I could do there and to show how far I've come. So again, how frequently are we falling into those old patterns? How long are we staying there? Maybe I started beating myself up, but I caught it and I celebrated the awareness instead of going,
Yeah, I
oh,
was
I
about
was
to
beating
say.
myself up.
I was about
Yeah,
to
go.
say about the catching, because that's something that I experienced in half marathon. Because like for me, I wouldn't see myself as runner or ever even considering doing that long distances. And I would catch myself as I was in the race, or even as I was approaching the race. I was like, who am I to like think now that I can finish this or get it done in time or like whatever. Even on the race, I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm one of the last people. And but then I would remind myself something that a friend of mine said, that he was like, this is your first time ever. So this is your like start of point. And you finishing that in itself is like huge accomplishment. It's just that comparison that a lot of times we have with, rather than in my case, let's say comparing myself to who I was yesterday, which like I would never even consider distances like that. I
Yeah.
now compare myself to somebody who's been doing it for years, and that's something that they love to do. And it's really easy to, but the reason why I brought this up is that I would catch myself. I would catch myself or become aware that I'm now starting to go that path of wanting to be like, oh, I should, I could, and all this kind of stuff, instead of even celebrating the fact that I would be running. Because like when I was 10 years old, I would run at 5 a.m. because I was afraid of people seeing me running. And now like
Yeah.
going the whole journey to running among like thousands of people, and I would be blind to that because I'd focus on this one negative thing that would like
Yeah. And
happen. And
that's
it's,
normal.
yeah.
So it's important to tell ourselves that's normal. But you're, like you said, what we can do is catch it. And we might catch it when it's just like slightly straying. I heard a metaphor once I like. It's like a herd of sheep, your thoughts, and you see one kind of going astray and you lovingly herd it back in. Or another metaphor I use is it's like a train and you want to get it before it's like as it's heading out of the station, because it's a lot easier to stop a train that hasn't built up momentum yet. But even if it does build up momentum and it's like going to be a lot harder to stop or redirect, you still always want to pause and celebrate the awareness instead of going, oh, there I go, beating myself up again. What an idiot. You go, oh, I am in awareness that I was beating myself up. That means it's no longer below the level of my awareness. It's no longer a subconscious program. I am aware of it. It's only once we become aware of something that we have the free will to do something about it. So awareness is always a celebration.
Yeah. So getting back to that question about how do you know which program that you want to install or develop is the one that you want or that you think that you want?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, as we talked about in previous episodes, are we making a decision or a program that fits our conditioned self or our authentic self? And doing a little bit of self-discovery first can be very helpful so that we're starting to get to know our authentic self, and we're starting to learn how to run this vehicle of consciousness so that we're not just strapped on in the back along for a ride, along for a joyride. And understanding that we can replace software as we go. It's not like we have to permanently install that software. And there are some software that's probably beneficial and healthy for everybody, regardless of whether they're in their conditioned self or their magnetic masculinity. And those are things like self-compassion, acceptance, good sleep hygiene so that we're rested and we have lots of units of energy to spend, because it's hard to create new neural pathways, patterns, and habits when we don't have units of energy, because energy takes the path of least resistance. And if we have all of this old software, all of these neural pathways that are firing and wiring together, then the first thing we might want to do is build up some units of energy to spend so that we can get that train going in another direction. So some of the first software we can install are just really good habits that help energize our being. And when we have, because we're quantum physics, we know that we are beings of energy. So like I often say, if we have very low energy or we don't have units of energy to spend, it's really hard to create new neural pathways. It's really hard to create new habits, and it's really hard to connect to our intuition and our authenticity because we're just drained. So we can install habits of energizing thoughts, self-compassion, acceptance, self-worth. We can reprogram that inner critic to become an inner coach. We can install programs of celebrating our success and celebrating our failures and cheering ourselves on. So there's a lot of software that would just benefit anybody experiencing life on this planet as a human.
Yeah, I was about to ask, maybe as we close off, about how do we start with installing them, especially if let's say we get in a state of awareness and we see all the softwares that we need to change, and that in itself can maybe feel overwhelming.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
and in that, I think a lot of times we can get to a place where we don't even start, or we feel so overwhelmed that we just, want to have some distance, or just, yeah, it's pretty much like paralyzing. What would be
I've been
like,
there.
yeah, me too. That's why I'm asking. So where can a person start when it comes to reprogramming? And start in a way where it can and it will work, and it's not like changing everything at the same time, or maybe it's possible to change
Yeah.
everything. I don't know.
So that's a really good question again. And the first thing I would invite people to consider is, again, to celebrate the awareness. Celebrate the awareness that, oh, here's something else that I would prefer to change. Oh, here's something else I'd prefer to change. Put it in a little notebook for your future self. And then again, start with the habits that are going to provide you energy to make bigger changes. I tend to look at, again, the progress over the absence of perfection. I tend to look in like 1 year chunks. So we're not going to change everything right now. We're going to pick one thing at a time, and we are going to do it over and over until that becomes subconscious habit. Then you don't have to do anything. It's programmed, it's subconscious. It does not require your effort. Then we pick the next thing. People often call that stacking micro habits. And so again, starting with something that's going to provide you units of energy like sleep or nutrition or positive thinking, so that you start by building up energy and celebrating the success and celebrating the failures and celebrating yourself. And I have different tools that I use to help with repetition, because again, the subconscious learns through repetition, and it can take us a year if we're not repeating it very often, or we can use tools where we're just repeating, and getting that software in as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's where having support can be helpful. Some of my VIP clients, I don't work with a lot of them at a time, that are on a 1-year journey. I will send them a little reminder every day on WhatsApp. Hey, remember this today. Hey, cheering you on today. Hey, you got this. And focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 things at a time. And yeah, and literally just repeating those over and over and over until that becomes subconscious software that's running effortlessly. You don't have to think about it anymore. And then picking the next thing. And again, not focusing on being at the end of that marathon, but focusing continuously on putting one foot in front of the other. And anything that you become aware of, get it out of your mind so it's not taking up space, and just put it somewhere. Oh, someday I'd like to do this. And don't look at that list and be like, I have to do all this right now. Just say, I just have to pick one thing. And in 1 year or 2 years, wow, I'll be able to install all this software and it'll be running effortlessly. Just as effortlessly as my old patterns, my old thoughts, my old behaviors, and my own habits used to run effortlessly.
Oh, I love that. It's also really practical and not overwhelming. What
You
do
know
we
me,
do?
I like practical tools. I
Yeah.
like results. I like results
What do we
as
do
quickly
if
as possible.
what do we do if we now start to work on these like 1 to 3 things, but the whole time maybe our focus is on the something that's still the wrong software? Because I think kind of instead of focusing on the positive, maybe we naturally want to focus on, I'm working on this, but still I have all this whole list of things that are not working or are bad softwares.
Yeah, so that's a very normal software itself. And we also know through good behavioral science that the brain has a negative bias. So you have to make a conscious choice, again, to celebrate the expansion, celebrate the awareness, celebrate your failures. You need to set a reminder on your phone twice a day. Or if somebody wants to do a deep dive and really reprogram quickly, I have systems and methods where every 15 minutes there's something to remind them. Boom, what am I thinking about right now? Boom, what am I thinking about right now? And then you'd be amazed what you can do in a week. So again, it's becoming aware and going, oh, I'm aware that I was doing that thing I do of focusing on the negative. Wow. I'm in awareness. I'm nailing it. I'm amazing. And then choosing a different thought. Now, something else we'd maybe want to talk about in another episode is resistance. So when we're making changes, what we resist persists. And like we've talked about before, we want to bring some of those characters out of our subconscious, those parts of us, our multidimensional self, and give them a seat at the table of our consciousness or at the boardroom, and give them a chance to hold the talking stick. Because if we are trying to make a change, and this is very important, I'm glad we're ending with this. And this is something else that we should do maybe a whole episode on in the future if you think it's relevant.
Yeah.
Is what we resist persists. And it's much easier to make a change if all the parts of us are on board with the change, and we don't have part of us that's what we call self-sabotaging, which is not really self-sabotaging self. It's one of these subconscious parts that's afraid or trying to keep us safe or trying to keep us small. Or let me give you an example of this. Sometimes if somebody's going on a food addiction journey and they want to create new habits, there might be a part of them that's like, hey, you're not doing anything fun. You work 60 hours a week. You're not emotionally connected to people. The only way that we're getting pleasure chemicals in this vehicle of consciousness is through eating cheeseburgers. And you want me to give up cheeseburgers? No way, asshole. I'm not doing it. You know, so there might be a part of us that's like in resistance to that change, or a part of us that's afraid of that change or misaligned with that change. So it can be very helpful first in this reprogramming protocols that I've created, in these reprogramming protocols I've created, to deal first with any resistance. And because a lot of our resistance can be subconscious, that can be helpful to have somebody to work with and help us sort of reflect and guide us, or just offer different perspectives that it might be, or somebody like me that's seen these patterns over and over again, and I know what some of the common patterns of resistance are. Another metaphor I use is, imagine that the 10 parts of your personality, your protector, your inner father, your inner child, your inner defensive guy, your inner CEO, your inner, all these different guys, we go on a field trip, on a canoe trip, and we put them all in a big boat, and they're going to paddle to a new destination. But if you don't have all of them on board with the direction you're paddling, and this is often why change can feel really hard, is that you might have 10 of those characters. 3 of them are paddling to the destination you want. 5 of them are completely oblivious that they're on a journey and they're not paddling at all. And the other 2 might be furiously paddling in the opposite direction, back towards what they perceive as safety or that conditioned self, because the left brain prioritizes avoiding pain, and change is often uncomfortable, so the brain wants to avoid it. It's having a negative bias, and it's trying to run as efficiently as possible because it's a computer. So it wants to take the path of least resistance, the old neural pathways. Or our inner child or personality parts might have resistance to that. Think of a time when you've made a decision, say taking a new job or working with me or whatever it is, and part of you feels one way, part of you's like, I'm so excited, and part of you's like, are you an idiot? Don't do this. It's stupid. You're never going to succeed at it. And part of you's like, I could be really good at this. And part of you's like, you're going to suck at this. So again, it's that internal battle. It's paddling this way, paddling that way. 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. So before we do any programming, one of the things that I do, I think that's relatively unique, although I don't know what everybody else does, so that's probably not even fair to say, is I help people deal with the resistance, or encourage them to deal with or explore if there's any resistance first. Because if we have all the parts of us on board with the change, it's a lot easier to create change than if part of us is paddling in the other direction, or we don't have that strategic alignment within the board members. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely helps if you have less or no resistance. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And that's speaking from experience as well. Like, and it's really exhausting if you have to, or you try to force going through that resistance if you don't know how to get everybody on board and rowing in the same direction. Because like, I think even like for me, that would be the only thing that I would know, just like power through and try to fight yourself. And it's so exhausting that you spend so much energy in just fighting with yourself rather than just being productive and getting done whatever you need to get done. And that's where it's like really, really important to get everybody on board.
Yes, and remembering that all of those parts that aren't on board, it's much like you said, we can push them and force them and bulldoze them and bully them into submission, but that doesn't feel good. And what we resist persists, as Carl Jung said. So we're in resistance to that, or sometimes I've found that I'm in resistance to my own resistance. So instead, it's looking at those things and figuring out what their positive intention is, or what their fear is, or what their limiting belief is, or just finding an aspect to reflect to those parts of ourselves that'll help them get on board.
Yeah.
And then sometimes understanding that there is also just a layer of discomfort that often goes along with growth. As I often repeat, and I've said to you a lot of times, and I've even said in this show, mental, emotional, personal, spiritual growth, whatever you want to call it, all of those different things, is not that different necessarily than growing a new bicep muscle. If I go into my gym and I start lifting weights and I want to build a new bicep muscle, it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And I'm going to say, I'm going to make it mean that I'm succeeding. And I'm going to celebrate that discomfort as a sign that I'm growing. And then I'm going to take a little extra rest. I'm going to stretch. I'm going to get extra sleep that night. I'm going to eat a little bit of extra fruit and a little extra spinach and drink a little extra water. and I'm going to wait for it to grow. But often when we start feeling that discomfort in personal, mental, or emotional growth, we make that discomfort mean we're failing. We're not aware that that left brain, that supercomputer, is going to go stop, 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 because one of its jobs is to avoid pain. So again, creating that program of celebration and making that discomfort mean that we're doing amazing, and celebrating and nurturing and cheering ourselves through that discomfort, getting comfortable feeling uncomfortable, can also help.
Oh,
Because
I
even
love
if
that.
all of our parts are on board, there might be slight discomfort as we're creating a new neural pathway or building that different habit or muscle, especially when our conditioned self is just so used to doing things a certain way.
Yeah, and then over time, you start to even enjoy that growth or that discomfort that comes with it.
Yeah, sometimes now I'm like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable. And to me, that's a KPI that I am like about to expand or grow, or like sometimes the metaphor I use is like the phoenix burning in the ashes before it rises anew. So instead of fearing or making that discomfort mean something unhelpful, I literally make it mean that I'm amazing, and I use it as like, look at how great you're doing. And I cheer myself on and I support myself through that.
I love that. Anything you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I think that was probably quite a lot of information
It
in
was,
one
it was.
episode.
It was like super valuable. I probably will go through it myself with notes.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And if you have any questions for Sandy, which we're always welcome to get any questions,
I love
or
questions.
you want to work with Sandy, there will be all the details in show notes as well. And we will see you next week.
Great. Thank you.